Whenever anyone starts to research into their family tree, there is a definite starting point, which usually commences with compiling all the known knowledge of the family that exists. Each time a question is asked, the search for answers continues. Sometimes you are lucky, other times the questions remain unanswered. In our case, it started with an old wooden box that contained family photograph albums and also the birth, marriages and death records dating from the early 1800s. With these family birth, marriages and death records being excellent at substantiating the base for the Collins side of our family tree. If we now look at the Collins family in more detail, we know that they originated from and around Bradford, and from the knowledge that my brother, cousin and myself held, we could put this information together to give us the basis of quite a detailed family tree. As we build our family tree and go back a generation at a time, where each time we add to the tree of the person, we are including all the records of that person that we could gather about them. There are the birth, baptism, marriage, death records, together with information from census returns, probate, newspaper articles, even criminal and military records. The list goes on. If we take a look at the family tree, and starting with Sharp Collins and his wife, who was Mary Raystrick, online searches have given us information that they were both originally from Hartshead near Bradford, and that they were both weavers. They also lived all their lives within a 5-mile radius of where they were born. Just below Sharp and Mary on the tree, you can see Thomas D. Thompson and his wife Ada Darnborough. We know that they originated from Bedale in North Yorkshire, but spent most of their adult lives in Great Horton, which at the time was just north of Bradford. Thomas was a master joiner, and his workshop was on the main road, in what was at the time a boom area for building. Thomas built some houses for family, and it is in one of these houses that his daughter Emma and her husband Alfred Collins started their married life together. Alfred and Emma Collins went on to have 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys, and eventually they moved to Little Horton, which is between Great Horton and the centre of Bradford. 2 of the girls remained at home with their parents until quite late in life, whilst the elder sister married Ernest Clark, and they in turn had 4 children. Meanwhile, the brothers were pursuing their own careers, with George being a solicitor's clerk, and whilst studying down in London, he met and eventually married teacher Emily Batley. The youngest sibling was Harold Percy, and he became an apprentice engineer and was well underway with his training when his brother George's health started to decline, and George was advised to move to a location with clean air. A course of actions that would dramatically change George's and Harold Percy's lives was then researched. Meanwhile, an American clergyman by the name of Montgomery Barr had developed a plan to create settlements in the Saskatchewan and Alberta provinces of Canada. He had government backing and formulated plans to assist those who wished to emigrate to Canada, where, for $10 and 5 years working 160 acres of farmland, they would receive the land deed title for that farm. Barr and his compatriot, Exxon Lloyd, set up offices in London and started an advertising campaign to gather interest. 3,000 people put their names forward, and a selection process began, and in 1903 a ship, the SS Lake Manitoba, set off from Liverpool bound for Canada, where Barr, Lloyd and a full passenger contingent of emigrants on board. It was to be a 7-day journey to Nova Scotia aboard the vessel, and a further 5 days aboard the train until they arrived in the provincial capital that was, and still is, Saskatoon. There, the pioneers, as they would be called, lived in a tented city, gathered wagons, horses, equipment and supplies before setting off on the 200-mile journey to the settlement areas. The ship passenger list has a name that stands out. He is young, at only 18 years of age. He is Harold Percy Collins, and he arrived in Canada in April 1903 alone. It was not the original intention that he would travel there alone. He was supposed to travel with his brother, sister-in-law and niece, but an illness to his brother George resulted in them delaying their departure for a year. We are unsure of what happened to Harold Percy during the time period between his arrival and the arrival of his brother and family. We do know that they arrived in Saskatoon and then began the overland trek to North Battleford, where an entry in the 1910 census shows that they were living on adjacent plots of land. Their farms developed and titles received, but then things took a dramatic turn. War. Harold Percy enlisted with his friend Bob Sanderson, and they were soon part of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and they found themselves in Kent, awaiting posting to the front. Life at the front was hard, and from what Harold Percy's daughter would be told, he saw a lot of mud, confusion, and stacks of bodies. Alas, time at the front was bad, and it got worse for Harold Percy when he was wounded, and he was eventually repatriated back to the UK to convalesce. He found himself in a small village in Cheshire, which is Frodsham. A hospital had been created on top of the hill that overlooks the village, and it is here that he met the femme fatale that was Annie Mary Ainsworth. After an on-off relationship, when Harold Percy was sent back to the front, only to be injured again, this time to the extent that he was unable to walk properly, and hence he would be not much good going over the top. Once again Harold Percy found himself back in England, and he took up with Annie Mary again. They married, and he was sent back to Canada, and Annie Mary followed him 3 months later. Life on the farm was good, with 2 daughters being born, Barbara and Nancy. Life was not to be as good or kind to his brother George, for he deteriorated in his health and passed away in 1922. This resulted in his wife and youngest daughter moving from the farm to the nearby village of Lashburn, where Emily would teach school for the rest of her life. George and Emily's older daughter married Bob Sanderson, and they took over the running of the farm. Life was not to be kind to Harold Percy, for his health also suffered as a result of the injuries received during the war. They sold the farm livestock and equipment and moved to Saskatoon, where Harold Percy would be nearer medical care, and he took up work in the plumbing industry. We know from the Henderson directories where they were living and what Harold was doing during the periods they lived in Saskatoon. Our family photograph albums have images of the houses they lived in, and we know that those very same houses exist today. Life in Saskatoon for the Collins family was just about to dramatically change. For on the 5th of September 1931, Harold Percy Collins passed away. He had succumbed to the injuries received during the First World War, and he paid the ultimate price for serving his new country. Annie Mary and her daughters sold up and moved back to England, eventually settling in the seaside town of Morecambe, where their neighbour was to be Harold Percy's sister, Florence. For it is thanks to Florence that we have the photograph albums and the family records. In 2017, our cousin Chris visited what was the Collins farm, the nearby town of Lashburn and Saskatoon, where he paid respects at the grave of Harold Percy Collins, our grandfather.